Time now for Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. Here's Nick Slegel and Brian Dezelske.
Welcome to another edition of Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. My name is Nick Slegel, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Brian Dezelske. Brian, how's it going, buddy?
It's going really well today. Excited for episode number 2 of the show. We got a great show today, so I'm pumped.
Yeah, definitely. We have Jamey Eisenberg from CBS Sports coming on to talk to us a little bit today. We're going to talk some first pick strategy, what to do with your pick in the first round, and where to go from there if things go wrong or if they go well. Then Mattek is going to stop by. We're going to crunch some numbers and talk about some of his recent articles, and then we're going to finish up with some auction draft strategy. So we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with Jamey Eisenberg on Fantasy Forecast Central Radio.
Football fans, check out ProFootballCentral.com for all the latest NFL news and analysis. Also, check out the very popular Pro Football Central Radio Network for awesome NFL talk around the league. Go to ProFootballCentral.com. ProFootballCentral.com.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We're joined now by Jamey Eisenberg, senior fantasy writer for CBS Sports. Jamey, thanks for coming on. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So this weekend, with training camp starting, we saw a lot of big season-ending injuries. One of which, Jeremy Maclin going down with that torn ACL. In your opinion, how does this affect, Deshaun Jackson, Jason Avant, Brent Selleck, LaShawn McCoy, Michael Vick, basically the whole team from a fantasy perspective?
I thought you wanted to talk about Dan Coffin when you said torn ACLs.
We're getting there.
I'm just kidding. I think, it's a big impact because, in my opinion, Jeremy Maclin was the best receiver for the Eagles, and, he was obviously poised to have a big season because, you look at it, he was in a contract year and, spoke about being very motivated playing in this offense, and now they're going to have to find somebody else to step up. I think Deshaun Jackson's role is going to be similar. He becomes a little bit more of a little bit better fantasy option. I think there's still going to be a lot of trust issues with fantasy owners based on what's happened to Jackson the last couple of seasons. But I think he's still a capable third receiver, depending on how your draft goes or how many teams are in your league. The other, positions I think are going to have to sort of, depend because the tight end spot, there's going to be a lot of competition there. Zach Ertz, I think, is going to, establish himself. James Casey, somebody that I'm excited about just because getting a chance to play sort of that, unique role, I guess they call it the Joker role, just how he's going to be used in that offense and, has the potential to, be a playmaker for them, can sort of do some of the things like an Aaron Hernandez was doing with the Patriots. And then, Brent Selleck is somebody that's been there forever and clearly has, made plays, has always been, on the cusp, if not at times a top 10 fantasy tight end. So all three of those guys, I think, will have a role. We'll see who emerges as the best option there. For this year, I would bet on Casey, long-term Ertz. I'm not really sold on the other receivers there. I just don't think you're going to get a lot of production from that other spot because I think it's going to be a bunch of different guys, whether it's Cooper, Avant, Demaryius Johnson. Somebody will step up and make plays there. And then we'll see who wins the quarterback battle because, Michael Vick, I think, has the most upside fantasy-wise, but he may not be the starter come week 1. Could be Nick Foles, could be Matt Barkley, for all we know with what Chip Kelly's thinking.
Yeah, we're getting different reports out of there all the time. I don't know if you heard this weekend, but they said Dennis Dixon was actually leading the race now, which just kind of made me laugh. But because, like you said, there's no real clear-cut number 2 receiver now. There's a steep fall-off after Maclin and Jackson. Do you think they'll employ more 3 tight end sets now, and we should maybe value all 3 of their tight ends a little higher than we already were?
Yeah, I don't know if you'll see exactly 3 tight end sets in the traditional, sense of them being tight ends. Clearly the position designation, I'm sure is what you're getting at. But I just don't know from a fantasy perspective, even with the lack of talent at the tight end position, with Pitta going down, with Hernandez not being there, with Gronkowski being hurt, that you could say that one of those guys is going to be a legitimate week in, week out starter. I think from my perspective, if you're ranking them for this season, I would still take Casey first. I would take Ertz second. I would take Selleck third. But I don't know if I'm going to draft any of those guys just because I think unless you're talking about, a 16-team league or larger, I don't know if you want to really consider those guys one of those weekly starters for your team. Could be somebody you gamble on, if you're in the deeper draft and you just want to take a shot at one of those tight ends to be your number 2 option, bye-week replacement, injury replacement. Potentially that happens. But I think that, when you're looking at, a 15-round draft, a 12-team league, you're drafting LaShawn McCoy, you're drafting Bryce Brown, you're drafting Deshaun Jackson, and really after that, I don't know if there's going to be any other Eagles that are going to be locked in as must-draft guys, in just those type of shallower formats.
Okay, I see where you're going. So it's really funny you brought up Dan Koppen because that was actually my second question. Obviously, the Denver's starting center going down is big in an NFL perspective. But from a fantasy perspective, does this affect Manning or anyone else on the team, or do you think they're still going to be okay?
I think they'll be okay. He covers up a lot of mistakes on the offensive line in terms of Peyton Manning because he gets rid of the ball so quickly. He knows what he's doing. It's a timing-based passing system. So it's predicated on Peyton Manning knowing where he's going to move in the pocket. He'll understand, what Manny Ramirez is able to do as the replacement center, and hopefully he's just able to hold up and do a good job, so that we're not seeing that offensive line get such a push up the middle where Peyton's got somebody in his face or the running game can't get going. It's definitely a situation that you don't want to see happen to a prolific offense, but, I still think they have enough pieces in place and enough things, enough time to get ready to get Ramirez, if he's in fact the guy that's going to replace Coppin for the long haul, to get him up to speed and get him ready to go. So definitely something you don't want to see, but still I think it's something that they can cover up and still be okay with going forward.
Hey, Jamey. One thing people like to talk about when it comes to fantasy football is player ranks. People love to rank players 1 through 5, 1 through 10. They like to have, they like to see that sort of thing. Going through your ranks, your running back rankings, you have Adrian Peterson number 1, like pretty much everybody in the entire universe. But when it comes to number 2, things change a little bit. You have Jamal Charles number 2, and you actually have Arian Foster at number 4 behind Doug Martin. What are you seeing from Arian Foster that has you dropping him down that far? Because I have not seen that from pretty much anybody else. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think when you get past Peterson, and as I think the preseason is going to unfold and training camp unfolds, 2 through basically 10, you can find probably a lot of different variations on who's going to be where. I think the consensus will be Arian Foster, and I'm certainly fine with that. But if you look at Foster by comparison to Jamal Charles and to Doug Martin, the 2 guys who I have ahead of him, the most glaring thing for me is, and I'll even put the workload aside for a second on Foster because he's coming off a season where he really touched the ball a lot and was a significant factor just in terms of his workload. And that as you're seeing now with the potential injury that he's dealing with, the calf problem, that tends to carry over a little bit year to year. But Ben Tate is going to be a serious playmaker for the Texans, even with a healthy Arian Foster. And a lot of those other guys, which is why you hear a lot of people a little bit negatively talking about maybe Ray Rice because of Bernard Pierce and to a lesser extent LaShawn McCoy because of Bryce Brown. Ben Tate, I think, is clearly a talented guy, somebody that, when the Texans drafted him, he was expected to be the guy the year that Arian Foster had that big season. So you go back to where they were a couple of years ago when Ben Tate was healthy, and Foster, as amazing as he was, which is why he's still in my top 5, I think he's still going to be amazing. But Ben Tate played a significant role there, and you're talking about the workload that Foster had, and you factor all those things in. I just think the upside for Jamal Charles in an Andy Reid system, we've seen guys, you go back to Deuce Staley, you go back to Brian Westbrook, you go back to LaShawn McCoy, they've all had monster seasons playing for Andy Reid, even though he's not necessarily a run-first type of coach. But Charles has a skill set that I think Andy Reid will definitely utilize. And then Doug Martin, I think everybody's excited about him just playing in that Tampa Bay offense and what he did last year. So I just think the upside favors Charles and Martin a little bit more than Foster. But if you want to take Foster second overall, I'm certainly not going to complain about it.
Yeah, I've always liked Ben Tate. I think he's a talented running back, and I think he's going to garner more carries this upcoming season. Let's switch position to quarterback, and I see that you have Colin Kaepernick outside your top 10 at number 13, actually behind Eli Manning at number 12. What are you seeing out of Kaepernick out in San Francisco that has you ranking him a little bit lower than most people have currently?
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the loss of Crabtree. I think a lot of people are when you look at that receiving core, but Crabtree was such a significant part of what Kaepernick was able to do last year. And I think if you just look at the quarterback landscape, he's going to be phenomenal. I don't think anybody can argue with Colin Kaepernick's ability and, his throwing potential and certainly his rushing potential. He's, one of those quarterbacks that you look at and you say, wow, I'd love to have this guy not only on my fantasy team, but being the quarterback of my NFL team. But I think when you look at the quarterbacks that are ahead of him, including Eli Manning, RG3, Tony Romo, you can sort of put Russell Wilson, I think, in the same category as Kaepernick if Percy Harvin's not there. But we saw Russell Wilson with the same receiving core do phenomenal things last year, whereas Kaepernick relied so much on Crabtree that's just a little bit of a concern for me that the receiving core and the receiving numbers are not going to be as productive as he's not going to be as productive as he was last year throwing the ball. So I think he just gets a little bit of a downgrade. If I was really so against him, I would drop him lower than 13. But I think for my top 12, and the question will become, why Eli Manning over Kaepernick? Because I think the other guys are probably in the majority of the top 12 that you'll see on any rank list for any site. Eli Manning, to me, I think has a bounce-back year in him, and I think it's going to be a good bounce-back year because he gets Hakeem Nicks healthy. He gets Victor Cruz, no holdout, ready to go for the start of camp. I love what Ruben Randall brings to the table. I like the addition of Brandon Myers, so there's really no drop-off losing a guy like Martellus Bennett. And I think if you look at what David Wilson brings to the table as a receiver out of the backfield, a dynamic type of speed that they really haven't had, you can argue since Tiki Barber, but maybe he's even faster than Tiki Barber. So I think that Eli Manning has a chance to ascend and be a little bit better than Kaepernick. I'm just a little bit concerned about Kaepernick without Crabtree.
Yeah, and that's a fair assumption. Like you said, Krabs was a huge part of everything that Kaepernick did last year. So it's right to be a little concerned without Crabtree in that offense because he's clearly going to have to find another number one from, for most of the season, if not the whole season. And then next year moving forward, things will probably be a little better. But I wanted to take a second to jump back to Denver. Ever since the draft, when they drafted Monty Ball in the second round, everyone's been talking about how Monty Ball, it was going to be the Monty Ball show, including John Fox and Peyton Manning at one point saying it was, they were going to let it run through him. He was going to get significant carries. They weren't going to hold him back. But now we're hearing that Ronnie Hillman is taking most of the first team reps, kind of winning over the job there. Is this something we need to worry about if we've already drafted Monty Ball? Do you envision Ronnie Hillman being the go-to guy out of week one? And if so, where does his fantasy value sit?
Well, I think it depends on sort of how you're viewing the Broncos running backs and just fantasy-wise, because I still think Monty Ball, even if he's not the starter to open week one, I don't think there's any doubt he's going to lead them in rushing touchdowns if he stays healthy, because that's what they brought him in for, to be the power guy between the tackles and to certainly be the guy that works at the goal line. And they were so good at running the ball inside the red zone last year, and they definitely ran the ball a ton in the red zone last year. And this is where Monty Ball is going to step up, and I think, help them improve from where they were a year ago. But we know this is a pass-first offense, and as we were just talking about with Coppin, the key for the Broncos is making sure Peyton Manning's healthy. And if you can't pass protect, you're not going to be back there for the majority of snaps. And they like what they've seen from Ronnie Hillman so far. Clearly they know what they have in Noshawn Marino, who's been doing it for several years and was a key contributor for them down the stretch last season after McGahee got hurt. So this could be a committee, and I think you look at John Fox's history, going back to Carolina with all the running backs that he used there, and definitely didn't really rely on one guy. It was always two guys. He's going to use both guys, whether it's Hillman and Ball, Marino and Ball, could be Hillman and Marino for all we know. I would hope that's not the case, but I think you should still consider Monty Ball, a guy to draft in an RB2 range, something in round 4 in a standard league, probably round 5 or maybe even round 6 in a PPR format. It's all going to depend on how your draft unfolds, where you value him. And I think Ronnie Hillman, if you look at his ADP right now, it's low by where it should be, because he's going to creep up more and more. The better he looks in training camp, the better he looks in preseason games, and the better these reports continue to work out in his favor. So I think Ronnie Hillman's a little underdrafted. Monty Ball maybe a little bit overdrafted, but I still think if I'm drafting, I'm still taking Monty Ball first, unless it really gets in favor of Ronnie Hillman going forward.
Yeah, and that was my follow-up question. We've seen a few players over the course of the summer sort of just become crazy hot in the fantasy world and seen their ADP really rise. Shane Vereen was the last one. Jordan Reed, the tight end. Jordan Cameron, the tight end. I've seen just quite a few players, across ESPN, Yahoo, MFL, really jump up in the rankings because they were sort of the talk of the media at the time. Do you see that happening with Hillman if things continue to progress well through the preseason?
Oh, sure. Anytime you can get a starting running back in a prolific offense, that's the things that we covet. And, if Ronnie Hillman is the guy that ends up being the starter week one, Again, I don't think he's going to be, in the mold of a Marshawn Lynch, of a guy who's going to be 300 plus carries. Certainly, 300 touches is a huge stretch for somebody of his caliber. But, if he's the guy under center, in the backfield week one, getting those first down carries, we know he'll play on passing downs because, I don't think that's Monty Ball's strength. He's only going to continue to be a hotter name, and may get to the point now with what we're seeing with somebody like Shane Vereen, where he does become a little too overhyped or probably overdrafted. But you have to sort of, with that position, because finding talented players at that position is becoming scarce. You have to sort of maybe fall in love with those guys a little bit and try and reach for them, and then sort of backfill with maybe your receiver spot, or wait on a tight end, wait on a quarterback. You can never have enough running back depth, and if you have to sort of reach for guys because the draft is sort of going that way, then that's the type of guy you want to reach for because plays in a great offense and does have a lot of upside.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jamey. It was great having you. Besides your normal work at CBS Sports, can you tell everyone if you have anything special coming out in the near future and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, just everything that we're doing at CBSSports.com is getting you ready for your draft, and you should check it out. We actually have a live draft that we're going to be airing on the site on Thursday. Big blowout with some chats involved as well, and you can follow me on Twitter, and you can get all the information there, which is just at Jamey Eisenberg, which is JameyEisenberg.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, man. We look forward to having you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All fans, looking to get healthy this year? Now is the time, and I have the perfect place for you. Save 10% at onit.com/football radio. Exclusive PFC radio listeners save 10% off their order. That's onit.com, ONNIT.com/football radio.
And we're back on Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. So let's get a little bit into first pick strategy here. For me, in the first round, no matter where I'm picking, 1 through 12, let's just keep this to standard 12 team for now. I go running back no matter what. That's my thing. That's what's worked for me for years. But there's a lot of people that don't. So let's pretend just for a minute that we don't go running back in the first round. You take a receiver, God forbid, a quarterback. Where do you go from there to still build a winning fantasy franchise for the season?
Well, if I'm not taking a running back in the first round, the one option, I would take is Calvin Johnson, probably somewhere in that, 6 to 9 range is where I'm guessing Calvin Johnson will be drafted. But I'm not taking anything else in the first round. I'm definitely going to go running back, and I'm probably going to go running back. I'll let somebody else have Calvin Johnson. I'm definitely not going to take a quarterback. I know people like to put Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees on this fantasy pedestal because year after year, these two guys, along with Tom Brady and, other quarterbacks are always finishing at the top of the fantasy scoring. But the truth is, these quarterbacks, you only start one position. You're starting 2 running backs, and the key to winning a championship in fantasy is having 2 bell cow running backs if you can get your hands on them. If I do happen to draft Calvin Johnson in the first round, I'm definitely taking a running back in the second round. But the wide receiver position is so deep, in my opinion, that I think you can hold off, and you can even let go of a guy like AJ Green and Dez Bryant and Brandon Marshall. I think you can get solid production and solid value out of the wide receiver position in the third, fourth, or fifth rounds. And you and I discussed this quite a bit because you and I both come from the same school of thought as like the quarterback position. You wanted late round QBs. That's kind of how we all do our thing. Anywhere after the 7th, 8th round, 6th round maybe. But definitely in the first round, I'm looking at running back all the way. Even at the turn, if you're at if you got number 12 pick, if you can land a guy like Alfred Morris or Steven Jackson, somebody like that, even taking a chance on a guy like Chris Johnson might be stretching a little bit. He might be more of a, late second round, mid to late second round pick. But like a guy maybe like Stephen Ridley, I would feel comfortable taking at the top of the second round if I was on the turn. How about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. For me, to be honest, I'm not taking anyone but running backs in the first round. Now, that's not completely set in stone because I really like to never go into a draft, hard-headed and set on this is the way I'm going to draft. Because if you don't react to how everything is going, right there in front of you, your strategy could backfire on you. So there's scenarios where if I'm at like 10 or 11 in the first round and all of the running backs I like are gone, I might take a chance on Megatron, but you best believe at the turn, I'm going to be grabbing a running back right away. And like you said, I think Stephen Ridley's a great option right at the top of the second there. If you're a little deeper in the second, you can look at people like David Wilson, Lamar Miller. There's a lot of good second-year running backs this year that are going to make a bigger impact. But it's one of those things, like you said, late round QB is definitely the school I come from. There's such a huge drop off between the running backs, the top, let's call them the top tier, the first 12, and then there's that second tier, the running back twos, 13 through 26 roughly. And I'm just, ballparking these numbers right now, but after that, there's a very, very, very steep drop off in production, and there's even a pretty big drop off just between 12 and 24. And with receiver, there's more receivers and there's less of a drop off. It's more even keeled. So it's to your benefit to grab one of those running backs, at least one of them, really early, because you're going to miss out, like you said, on that bell cow back very quickly. And if you don't have a single one on your roster, yeah, you might have Aaron Rodgers and Des Bryant, but if you don't have any running backs, your team is not going to be consistently awesome, and you're definitely not going to win. Win your league. So we have here on the outline what we were going to is QB or wide receiver worth it in round one? I think we sort of just answered that. For QB, for me, it's obviously definitely not. And I feel like Megatron's probably the only wide receiver even remotely worth it towards the end of the first round. Are we on the same page here?
Like I said, I would maybe consider taking Megatron at the end of the first round, but chances are I wouldn't. I would probably just go running back, and then just wait. Like I said, the wide receiver position is so deep. You can get good value in the third, fourth, and fifth round, and you can still get a solid wide receiver one out of those rounds, in my opinion. Which brings us to the next question. If you are at the end of the first round or nearing the end of the first round, I mentioned earlier Alfred Morris as a potential first round pick. This guy came out with 1,600 yards last year as a rookie, 13 touchdowns, 245 fantasy points. Do you see him as a first round pick in a redraft league? I know there's been a lot of hesitation there. I think I'm taking him if he's there. If he falls to me, if I'm at the 10th pick, especially in a redraft league, I don't even hesitate. I jump all over him. How about you?
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. I don't know if you've caught it, but I wrote an article about this for Pro Football Focus last week. I feel like Alfred Morris is a definite number one. He's being undervalued right now, and that's fine because I'll grab him at the end of the first round happily. If you look at his stats from last year, he finished third in the league in missed tackles behind only Adrian Peterson and Doug Martin. He finished third in the league in yards after contact with 1,001 yards, third only to Adrian Peterson and Doug Martin, and over 200 yards over the next closest person. He's just a beast. He can stay on his feet. He can stay healthy. He can take a beating and just keep pounding the ball. I think he had 4.2 yards per carry, but I'm not positive on that off the top of my head. Either way, he's a solid, dependable running back. He didn't catch a lot of passes last year, but that's definitely going to change this year as they get him more comfortable. I mean, this is a dude that ended up taking 70% of all the offensive snaps, and it was a rookie, a fourth round pick? I mean, that's not maybe a 6th round pick. I can't even remember off the top of my head. Either way,
he was
that's
a
not
6th rounder.
Yeah, that's not. You don't give 70% of the snaps to a 6th rounder unless you have a lot of confidence in them. And I think Shanahan's going to work him into the passing game more. We're probably going to see him leaned on pretty heavily the first few weeks as they ease Russell Wilson back into everything. RG3, not Russell Wilson. I've been on the Alfred Morris train for a while now, and I definitely think he's worth a late round, first round pick. Anywhere from like 10 down is just fine with me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So if you are one of those guys who love to take a wide receiver early, I mean, and say Megatron does get drafted in the first round in your league, because chances are he probably will. So you go and you take your running back in the first round, but you're one of those people that really love to get a top echelon wide receiver. But what position in the second round or the top of the third round even do you see the next in your mind what the next wide receiver should be taken off the board?
Ooh, for me, it's AJ Green. I love his skill set. I love the rapport he's built with Andy Dalton. And I love the fact now that with Eifert, Gresham, and Giovanni Bernard, it's going to spread that offense out. And it's going to allow Green to get open more frequently. And it's going to allow them, down the stretch, they're not going to get stagnant as an offense like they did last year. And that's going to be huge for Green to really pull away as that undisputed number 2 receiver. Behind him, it's kind of a toss-up for me. You can go Dez. I'm a little hesitant on Julio Jones still unless I can get Roddy White also, because if you go back and look at the numbers last year, they took turns every week being the number 1 fantasy receiver on the team. So if you only have one of them, you kind of every other week we're losing out on points. So if you can handcuff them together, you're sitting pretty. But see, that's, drafting Julio high worries me because then I have to try to figure out a strategy just to get Roddy later on. So I tend not to go for Julio too much. I like Dez. I've always been a Tony Romo apologist and felt like it was never his fault that the offense was so bad. Anytime you have an offensive line like that and almost no running game, a quarterback's going to struggle, especially someone, like Romo, like Brett Favre, a gunslinger that just wants to fire it in there. But he's got a good rapport with Dez now. Dez had a breakout towards the end of last season with a broken finger, so healthy. He could push for the number 2 role as well. So there's a lot of receivers you can take there and be really happy with in the end.
The only problem with that is like if you take a receiver there back in the third round, you're going to the general thought is you need to get that running back, that second running back. Then your options become limited. Your options go to like a DeMarco Murray or a broken down Darren McFadden, players in that caliber. At that point, do you maybe go for somebody who's been in the league for a few years, like a DeMarco Murray or a Run DMC, or do you want to try and maybe go for more upside potential with a guy like, say, Lamar Miller?
Well, I'm huge on the Lamar Miller train, so I'll go Lamar Miller all day. If he's not there, though, if we're talking just DMC or DeMarco Murray, I won't touch DeMarco Murray with a 10-foot pole. DMC is one of the best running backs in the league when healthy. He's got that new power blocking scheme, a really good offensive line. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be a fringe running back 1 by the season's end. So I'll take a chance on him. It's probably the last time I will. If he lets me down again this year, I'm probably over it.
No doubt. I've been bitten by the DMC bug quite a bit myself.
Yeah, haven't we all? But, we're running short on time here, so we're going to go to a quick break, and we will be right back with Davis Mattek.
Football fans, looking to get healthy this year? Now is the time, and I have the perfect place for you. Save 10% at onit.com/football radio. Exclusive PFC radio listeners save 10% off their order. That's onit.com, ONNIT.com/football radio.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We're joined now by Davis Mattek. Davis is a contributor at RotoViz, the lead writer at FantasySports.org, and the owner of SportsWonderkin.com. How's it going, Davis?
Going pretty good. How you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for coming on, man.
Well.
So let's jump right in. Well, I think it was this weekend or late last week. I saw on Twitter you were kind of working your way through a new statistic. It ended up being, and correct me if I'm wrong, adjusted yards per attempt for kick returns and punt returns, right?
It was just punt returns. I haven't finished the spreadsheet for kick returns yet.
Oh, okay. So basically, walk us through this. What made you think of this idea in the first place, and how did you sort of get to the end result?
Well, okay, so I play in return leagues, and there's a lot of guys who are going to return punts, but you don't necessarily know who's going to be good at it year to year. So I just wanted to see if there was any sort of predictive data, and just running a correlation on return yards from one year to the next didn't return anything all that meaningful. So I wanted to see if there was some way to sort it out by yards per attempt. So I just took the league average, and then I took a player's average for them and figured out how many yards better that was, and that wasn't predictive. So then I found the average length of all punt return touchdowns last year. There were 18 of them, and they averaged 76 yards. And for every touchdown a player scored, I added that to their average. So player who scored at least one touchdown got 76 yards added, and every player who scored 2 got 76 times 2 added. Basically what I found was that Leotis McKelvin is one of the greatest punt returners in the history of the game.
Really?
Yeah. On my table, no one had higher than I think 3 adjusted yards per attempt, and his was 14.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive number. So what? I've only played in one return league ever. I like them, but I just never seem to get into them. What is the point spread, like the point payout, like for return leagues?
Well, I play in a really weird league. I play in 2 return leagues, but we play by our point scoring goes by hundreds, not by tens. So like a really good week in that league is like 1,500 points, not 150 points.
Oh wow!
And we get I think it's for every 10 punt return yards we get 20 points.
Wow, that would be what, like 2 normally, like a normal standard league.
Exactly.
That's still
Right.
that's a lot. That's pretty cool. I have to look into one of those.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
So we talked about this a little with Jamey Eisenberg earlier. We had a ton of injuries, pretty big ones actually, season-ending ones.
Yeah.
Over the weekend. Dennis Pitta, the tight end for the Ravens, went down with that fractured hip, likely out for the season. They already lost Anquan Bolden. They were already thin with receiving weapons. What is the fantasy implications of the Pitta loss due to Flacco, Ed Dixon, and maybe even Shante Senko going forward?
Yeah, I think that Torrey Smith is just going to fall out of bed into 150 targets. Like, they're just going to have to – he's the most polished pass catcher on their offense, which sounds weird to say because he doesn't do a lot of parts of the route tree. But I really like Smith in fantasy, and Dixon is going to be an okay play. I think I'm going to move him up to, like, tight end 12 in my rankings once I sit down on Fantasy Pros and do that again. And right now he's going basically undrafted or really late, and I like him as a tight end streaming option all year. As far as the wide receiver 2, if like Tandon Goss wins, I'm not interested. But if Tommy Streeter gets playing time, I think he's worth like looking at the waiver wire early if we see like signs of the lights coming on for him.
So Davis, let's turn attention a little bit to player rankings. I'm a big player rankings kind of guy, and I went through your player rankings earlier this past weekend, and I noticed that you have Dez Bryant ranked a little bit higher than a lot of people. I mean, Dez Bryant's still ranked in the top 5 in most, but you have him ranked ahead of guys like AJ Green at number 2. What are you seeing from Dez in Dallas, and what makes you or what brings you to this conclusion?
Well, Dez Bryant is the only receiver other than Calvin that I really see having like a 15 touchdown season, like in his range. Last season, he had, out of 16 games, he had 10 games with either a touchdown or 100 yards, which is, you want that week-to-week consistency. I think the Bengals adding Eifert sort of spreads their target distribution around, and adding Giovanni Bernard means more passes are going to go to the running backs than last year. Obviously, he's still a top 5 guy, but Dez is sort of in a Calvin-like situation where he's really the only game in town.
Okay, but does the past history with Dez Bryant concern you at all? His mental state? I mean, sometimes he's there, and he's not quite in the game, and he'll go 1 or 2 catches for 9 or 10 yards, and
well, and it was that whole deal in 2011 where he would only post stats in the first half of the game, right? Like, and those are all valid concerns, but everything coming out of the Cowboys OTAs and out of training camp so far is that he's just completely locked in, and him and Romo have been working extra after practice. I think the light finally turned on for him about week 8 last year.
Okay. Let's turn our attention to the city of New Orleans and the Saints. I recently read an article where you explored Nick Toon as a possible replacement for Marcus Colston as the Saints wide receiver 1. What led you to this article idea in the first place, and what did you end up finding?
Well, actually, John Moore, he's a RotoViz writer at the CFX on Twitter, sort of put me on to him. The Saints kind of have this history of drafting wide receivers, and then they'll just redshirt them for a year, put them on IR with something. I wouldn't be surprised to see Kenny Stills end up on the IR at some point this year. But basically, they just draft these guys to give them a year to learn the offense, give them a year to work with Breeze and sort of figure out what's going on. But Toon has like a really impressive physical profile. He was really good in college by like the metrics that I look at, which is like market share of touchdowns and yards and conversion of red zone targets into touchdowns. And basically, he's the same physical profile as Colston. He's tall, he's fast. He's not a burner. He doesn't have 4.4 speed or anything like that. But he's big, he's fast, Colston is 30 years old, so if you're in a dynasty league, Toon is like the perfect addition because Breeze probably has 4 years left of elite production, and Colston probably has 2. And if they don't draft anyone else, they already have a replacement there on the roster. So there's a potential wide receiver 1 probably sitting on the wire in your dynasty league.
So what do you think we're going to see from Nick Toon this year in 2013?
I think that there's a chance that he beats Joe Morgan out and we see him on the outside in 3 wide receiver sets. I think it's going to be him, Lance Moore, and Colston by like week 5 or 6. I see that as a real possibility. And any wide receiver that is consistent and gets ahead and like gets on the field is going to be solid.
You know, I like that where you're going with Toon here, Davis, because obviously I'm a Wisconsin dude. I'm a big fan, and I might have been blinded with my love for him, but I saw a lot of natural talent and skill, and I loved when the Saints picked him because I knew, you know, Drew Brees loves to spread the ball around, and he's going to make an impact there one way or another. But so do you see him fully taking over this year then, or are we looking more like 2014 is when we should really count on it, like with redraft leagues?
I'm looking more towards 2014 in redraft leagues, but he's one of those guys that if you see, you know, the first week he plays, you know, 30 snaps, the next week he plays 35, and then by week 4, you know, he's on the field for over half of the Saints snaps, that's someone I would add for sure, because we've seen stretches where Robert Meacham and Devery Henderson were ownable in 12-team redraft leagues, and if that happens, Toon is way better than those guys and can easily fill that role.
Awesome. I like where your head's at there, buddy. So thank you so much for coming on today. I think that's all the questions we have for you. Do you want to tell everyone where they can find you on social media and the internet?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Davis Mattek. I'll answer any fantasy questions that you guys have. I run my own website, sportswonderkin.com. I contribute over at RotoViz. I'm the lead writer over at FantasySports.org, and I am a football and baseball contributor over at thefantasyfix.com.
Busy man. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure we'll have you again in the future.
Yep.
Appreciate it, Davis.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio here on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. So right now, buddy, I am in a couple auction drafts, and these are always the most fun because they're always the most unpredictable. You know, you can head in with any sort of strategy, rankings, anything like that you want, but at the end of the day, at some point, it's just gonna get thrown out the window. You know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
You know, a couple strategies we were talking about pre-show that we see a lot of people do when you enter the draft, when you get started right away. You have the group of people that will dump, you know, 70, 80, maybe even 90% of their entire salary into 2 or 3 very, very elite players and then try to build a roster just, you know, by $2, $3 guys the rest of the time. And then there's that other group of people that do a good job of spreading it out evenly. You know, they'll spend more on a couple superstars, but on average they have a lot of, you know, $20, $25, $30 guys, which builds a better overall team in my mind, I guess. What do you think is the best strategy there? Can you build a winning team if you dump, you know, your entire salary into let's say 3 players? Can you still build a winning team?
Personally, I don't believe you can. Although I have seen it happen. I don't know if it's just stroke of luck rather than stroke of genius, but yeah, I have seen it happen where guys will draft. They'll spend all their money on 2 or 3 guys, and then they'll just load up on $1 and $2 and $3 players to round out their team. And they actually, it carries them to a title, to a championship. Me personally, I've seen far more scenarios where teams go to win a championship, fantasy championship, by being more conservative with their money. Like you were talking about, they spread it out more evenly throughout the entire roster, maybe going after 1 or 2 elite players, but not overpaying for them. Maybe not going after the Adrian Peterson, but maybe going after the Jamal Charles or the Doug Martins of the world, and getting 1 or 2 of those kind of players, and then rounding out with your what in a redraft league would be your 5th, 6th round guys, as opposed to filling out your roster with what would be the equivalent of 12th, 13th, and 14th round guys. Also, me personally, the few auction drafts that I have been in, or the few auction leagues I should say that I have been in, like I was telling you the other night, I'm very straightforward. I don't don't piss around with the whole throwing out the, like we were talking about, throwing out kickers and throwing out defenses and whatnot right away and trying to get people to run prices up on a kicker or whatnot. I don't buy into any of that. I know there's probably one or two guys in every league that does that. Your best bet is just to, like, stand pat, and wait for your moment, and when the time is right for you, when you want to grab a kicker, which is generally later on, then throw out a guy that you're targeting, and then go from there.
Yeah, it's one of those things where at the start of the draft, everyone's really excited, or at the start of the auction, excuse me, everyone's really excited. Everyone wants to get going right away, and at least half of the league usually are very concerned that they're going to miss that guy, that they just need that guy. One of the ones I'm in right now, we have a $400 budget with a 25-man roster, and somebody is spending $96 on just Doug Martin. So, just under 25% of their total salary on just one player. And that's fine. You got Doug Martin. Like, you're sitting pretty in a dynasty league for quite some time. But what can you build from there? And I think really the one rule that I never, ever break when I go into an auction that has helped me be able to build a more complete team beginning to end is the 20% rule. Basically, I will never spend more than 20% of my total salary on any one player. And after that, it's not even close, So I'm in the one I'm in right now. I am the highest bidder on Kaepernick for like $70. And that'll be the most I spend on a guy. The next guy highest will probably be like 50 or 45. And then it'll probably be a bunch of 25s across the board. And sometimes it's really hard to sit there and watch Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Adrian Peterson, all these top flight guys go off the board, and you're like, oh, my team's going to be so bad. Like, I'm missing out on everyone. But you got to remember, there's still so many people out there because each person's only nominating one person at a time. So when you go down and you look and you go to make your next nomination, you realize there's 10 running backs you're more than happy to have there. So I think it's okay to sit back and wait a little while. And, for me, as far as like setting the market goes, I don't think I've ever nominated a person I wanted on my team until I was down to when everyone only has like $3 left and you got to get like two $1 players, so nobody outbids anyone. That's about the only time I actually nominate someone that I actually want on my team. Otherwise, I'm worried about people thinking I want that person and trying to fight me for them. So if I were to nominate someone I wanted, I'm worried that it's going to get the price driven up too high and I'm going to count myself out and lose out on them. So I generally try to flood the market with players that I don't want. I'm not saying bad players. A perfect example would be Chris Johnson from the Titans. I don't want him. I don't like him. But I know a lot of people value him. I'll throw him out there so someone else scoops him up, gets him on their team. That's one less person I have to compete for a running back one now. So
I'll play some devil's advocate with you, though. You said you like to generally throw out players that you don't necessarily want early on. What are your fears of that guy ending up being on your roster? Say you throw him out and then you kind of trying to drive up the price, and hopefully another guy snags him for X amount of dollars. What happens if the price gets driven up to the point where you end up getting saddled with him? Do you run into that situation at all?
Yeah, I think you always have the danger of running into that situation. The biggest thing for me is I try to avoid, like Chris Johnson's a good example. It's a player I still wouldn't. I'm not going to go out and try to win, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to be sad he's on my roster. So I think you just have to find a decent low-ish number. Let's just call it $20 for Chris Johnson that you're willing to spend. And if it's always good to drive up the price on anyone, but you have to be careful because it can backfire on you at any moment. But I think if you set it at something reasonable that you're okay living with if he ends up on your roster, even if someone drives up the price and you get stuck with him, then like if I get stuck with Chris Johnson at $20, I'm okay with that. I'll take it all day. But you just need to avoid letting it get driven up to, like $40, $50 when it's a player you don't want, because then you're screwed. That actually almost happened to me with Shane Vereen last night. I was all day about him at $25, and then he hit $40, and I accidentally bid on him instead of Kaepernick, and I ended up almost costing myself like $58 for Shane Vereen, but thank God somebody else bid on him.
Okay, so let's turn the question to let's say backup running back. Since you mentioned Shane Vereen, how much should players in leagues be willing to spend on a backup such as Shane Vereen? Because we got guys like him, we have guys like Ben Tate who are all going to see time. Bernard Pierce in Baltimore. What are you seeing in auction leads right now where these guys are price-wise where these guys are going?
I think it really depends on so many different factors. Like I said at the beginning, every auction is so crazy and different. But for right now, I really believe that Ben Tate, Bryce Brown, Andre Brown, they're not going to have the hugest impact, I believe, that would warrant anything more than like $5 in Dynasty. Now, with Bernard Pierce, we have reports he's going to split the carries 50-50, split the playing time 50-50 with Ray Rice.
Which is crazy, by the way, to me.
Yes, thank you. Insanity. But at the same time,
absolute insanity.
That boosts his fantasy value significantly if he's going to get that many touches, because we know he's talented enough to do something with it. And then the guy we were talking about before, Shane Vereen, I think the draft I keep talking about is PPR, so it's a little different. But especially in PPR, Vereen is insanely valuable. He's going to have a big role in the passing, an expanded role in the passing game. He's still going to get the carries. He's going to put up enough numbers to warrant being like a running back too in PPR leagues. So I think that does value him, somewhere between, in a $400 league anyway, somewhere between like $20 and $40. Maybe a little higher depending on how things are shaking out, but he's a pretty valuable commodity right now. Even in redraft, people are taking him pretty high.
So should people be worried about Stephen Ridley then? I mean, Stephen Ridley up to this point seemed to be the clear-cut number one guy in New England. Now all this Shane Vereen talk, what do we think we're going to see from Mr. Ridley here this year?
Well, Ridley's still a running back one, like a fringe low end, like running back 10, 11, 12, somewhere right in there. He's going to get the bulk of the carries. He's going to put up good work. They're just talking about using Vereen more in the passing game because of his ability to catch passes and move it upfield. His build is more like an H-back. So I think it's more the Patriots having not a lot of set options on offense right now as far as weapons for Tom Brady, and Vereen playing a bigger role in that. So I'm really thinking he's probably only going to get maybe 5-7 carries. It's more going to be targets in the passing game than anything that's going to up his value. Well, I think that's all we have for our second episode of Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. I want to thank Jamey Eisenberg and Mattek for coming on. It was a great and awesome show. Everyone head on over to ProFootballCentral.com. We have a really great contest going on for a fat head right now. You can win a free fat head next week. So go get signed up for that. Try to win yourself some swag, and we will be back next week. Thanks for listening.
This has been a presentation of the Pro Football Central Network. For news, blogs, highlights, and more, log on to ProFootballCentral.com.